This is the IDP After Show.
Hey peoples, a massive welcome to the IDP After Show Week 8 Rankings episode. I'm Jase Abbey, and as usual, I'm going to be digging through some of the highlight players in my weekly rankings. After flying solo last week, I'm pretty made up to welcome onto today's show possibly my favorite Canadian in the world and a legend in IDP circles, Mr. Jon Macri, fantasy analyst for PFF, host of the Big Nickel IDP podcast and the PFF Fantasy Pod. Jon, how goes it, dude?
It's going good, Jase. I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, nice of you to introduce me as your one of your potentially your favorite Canadian. Because Josh usually when he introduces me as his second or third favorite Canadian, and we still don't know who the number one is. But that was a nice compliment of you, and yeah, happy to be here and talk some IDP for sure.
Yeah, it's esteemed company up there. I guess for me, Ryan Reynolds, Seth Rogen, Jon Macri, I'm happy with any one of those guys in the number one. We're basically ranking Canadians on this pod right now.
Right. Yeah. This is a Canadians ranking show. Spoiler alert. Yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, man, I've been buzzing to have you on ever since I guilted you into it a few weeks back. Yeah, thanks for coming on. Look, we're getting into week 8 already. Can't believe we're almost halfway through the regular season, right?
Yeah.
There's like a huge collective sigh of relief as we get all of our players back this week for what I guess will be one of the last couple of times in the season. We've got 2 hellish bye weeks, haven't we? I think where we've got 6 teams on the bye, but yeah, this week I feel a bit spoilt for choice when I was doing my rankings, and I don't know about you, but I really struggled to narrow my list of linebackers down to 50. There was quite a few guys on that list that I actually left off. Was it a similar story with you as well?
Yeah, pretty much exactly the same. I do 60 linebackers, and there were still a couple guys that I left off as well, right? Just because you don't know how deep you want to try to include as many guys as possible, right? Because for deeper leagues and stuff like that. So there's still some guys that are potentially gonna play relevant snaps that didn't make it into the rankings, but you know, it's nice to have at least every team playing this week, and then people can choose. They have plenty of options at least, so that helps. Last week I had guys on there that I would not want to did not want to have ranked regularly, so it makes up for that.
Oh yeah, I was like scraping the bottom of the barrel for certain guys, especially at the DB position, 75 deep. That was a struggle at times, but yeah, look, since we're talking linebackers, let's transition seamlessly into breaking down the linebackers that we're championing this week. So who have you got up first? Who do you like at linebacker for week 8?
Yeah, so the guy that I think I'll start with is Kyzir White of the Arizona Cardinals. So coming off a fairly quiet game, he had just 5 total tackles last week, but he did add a couple tackles for loss. I think he had a pass breakup in there as well. He played 100% of the defensive snaps, which is the main thing that we're looking for. And you know, people I think were kind of frustrated or at least concerned about the game from last week for him. And these games happen all the time for linebackers, right? Especially against like non-optimal opponents, like the Seahawks were last week. They were below average in linebacker tackles tackles to the linebackers that they were facing. So that played a part in it. But this week, Kyzir White draws a very good matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, who are the most optimal opponent for linebacker tackles. They're giving up 20.6 tackles per game to the linebacker position, which really is a great boost for Kyzir White because he's the lone every down linebacker on this Arizona defense. Josh Woods plays, but he's not an every down player. So there's going to be more opportunity there potentially for Kyzir White. It's also a very zone heavy defense in Arizona. They're the 5th highest zone rate in the league, which I talk about all the time. That is a big boost for tackle efficiency for the linebacker position as well. So that certainly helps him. So all of that kind of combined, as well as his 100% playing time, make him kind of a top tier start for me this week. And I've actually moved him up to LB4 this week.
Yeah, we're fairly close then. I've got him as my LB5 this week.
Nice.
You know, like you said, it was a quieter week last week, but I'm not too concerned. You know, he's had 8 or more tackles in 5 of his other 7 games, which is pretty consistent. You know, and there's a few big plays sprinkled in there too. He's had a couple of sacks, an interception, a pass breakup last week, as you mentioned. But yeah, that Ravens matchup, it's too tasty not to want to start White as a really solid LB1, I think, this week. So I like the call. Good shout.
Thank you.
So my first guy is, and I was a little bit cautious with this one. I always want to mention if I'm going to champion one guy at a position, I want it to be a slam dunk. But I've been waiting so long to mention his name that I wasn't prepared to wait any longer. So it's Jack Campbell. Now I say that he's ranked as my LB 42 still, so really quite low. One behind Javon Bentley and one ahead of Anthony Walker. But oh man, I'm excited. It feels like the wait is over, right? 90% snap share, which is a huge increase from what you saw the week before, 50, 60% for it's kind of like the 4 games prior. So he's still behind the Prince of Asgard, Alex Anzalone. But crucially, it was the first time this year he jumped ahead of Derek Barnes. And that for me speaks volumes. I mean, yeah, look, he didn't have his best game. Everybody knows that. He finished with 6 tackles, but 5 of those were assists, and he looked a little lost on some of those plays, especially that one where he misread the fake handoff, and then Jackson waltzed in for a TD. I think Jack Campbell was like completely on the other side of the field by the end of the play. But as I wrote about elsewhere yesterday, I'm kind of hoping that he isn't viewed as the scapegoat for that performance, because the whole Lions defense stunk it up in that game, didn't they? And Dan Campbell obviously wasn't happy with the performance. He didn't hold back when he was talking about the performance afterwards, and he may want to make changes. I just hope that Jack Campbell's sort of snap trajectory that we've seen in the last 2 weeks isn't a casualty of that. So I kind of like Campbell. 90%, not quite there yet. I'd be much happier if he was overtaking Anzalone, but yeah, I really like what I'm seeing so far.
Yeah, that was definitely great to see. I loved to see he played 90% of snaps or something like that. So season high, obviously. I think probably the most interesting thing about the way they used him in that game is that he played 50% of his snaps on the edge as well, which was really strange. But it also, I think that played a part in kind of hurting his tackle efficiency in that game specifically, right? Because he immediately has to face offensive linemen as blockers there. So he doesn't get a chance to kind of shed those blocks or have the speed or movement to kind of get around them that he would at the second level, right? So I'll be interested to see kind of how they use him this week. I'm also a little bit tentative on him. I'm excited. I definitely have him over Derek Barnes this week as well. But yeah, I guess I just want to kind of see the usage there. And of course, it figures that the Lions kind of get blown out in the first game that they put him in as like a 90% player. So like you said, hopefully he doesn't end up being the scapegoat and they go back to Derek Barnes or anything. So I do want to see it for one more week from him, but I'm with you. I have him down in that LB, I guess 4 or 5 range as well for this week.
Okay, good stuff. So the quick hitters at linebacker, guys we like. Reel off some names for me, John. Who else do you like at the linebacker position for week 8?
So Azeez Al-Shaair of the Tennessee Titans, I have him as LB11 this week, coming off a bye week, but prior to the bye, had posted back-to-back 15 tackle games. He's pretty much earned his way into must-start territory for me as the Titans' lone every-down linebacker. Jack Gibbons has been solid as well, but not playing 100% of snaps like Al-Shaair. And then he especially becomes more enticing against the Falcons this week, who have allowed 19.3 tackles per game to the linebacker position, which is tied for the 4th most in the league heading into week 8.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and then I got a couple more if you want me to go through those ones as well.
Sure.
Okay. And I also got Frankie Lulu of the Carolina Panthers. He's LB15, so I like him to have a solid game, but it's kind of assuming that his hip is okay. He's coming off a bye week as well, but he did leave the team's week 6 game against Miami, I think it was, with an injury and didn't come back. So he's the lone every down linebacker on that team as well. Much like Kyzir White, Azeez Al-Shaair, and he's going against a Texans team who are allowing the 7th most tackles to the linebacker position. So I like that for him. Carolina, the 3rd most zone-heavy team in the league. I think that if he plays Luvu, that is a great spot to put up some tackles there. And then the last guy is Quay Walker. So Quay Walker of the Green Bay Packers got doubled up in total tackles last week by his teammate Isaiah McDuffie last week. Even though McDuffie only played 66% of the defensive snaps, Walker played all of them. I just like this as like a nice bounce back spot for Quay Walker. Another one of those guys playing in a zone heavy defense that's great for linebacker tackle efficiency. And their opponent, Minnesota, is 12th in tackles allowed to the linebacker position.
I like it. I like it. And Devondre Campbell's still not quite
Yeah.
right, is he? Not that really affects Walker, I don't think, as much as it would do on another team. So yeah, that's a good list. So I've gone with C.J. Mosley, Quincy Williams, Azeez Al-Shaair as well, and Nate Landman, and all of those guys are. The lowest of those guys I've got ranked is Landman, who's my LB18. The rest I think I've got as LB1s. All of those guys are every down players who have favorable matchups against teams that are allowing a high volume of tackles to opposition linebackers. Jamin Davis, I've got him listed here as well. He's a guy who should suddenly see a much larger role in the absence of Cody Barton. I don't know about you, but I've seen more talk about Mayo than I have about Davis in the last couple of days, and maybe it's because Mayo had no volume before, and everyone just knows that Davis is going to be the guy to step in for Barton. But that's maybe it's just the weird circles, weird IDP circles I move in. Who knows? But that's my take.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I like Jamin Davis to kind of take over that every down role. While if Barton misses time, right, and David Mayo could potentially, I think, move up into obviously snaps on probably around 70 or 80% of snaps, somewhere in that range. So I think most people probably, maybe it's just they were already on to Jamin Davis, and then David Mayo becomes the more obvious kind of waiver wire target, more widely available, right? So yeah, that could be it too.
Yeah, I think so. And then a couple of other sort of stragglers: Kenneth Murray, Nakobe Dean, and Zach Cunningham as well. I mean, their matchups aren't as sexy this week, but they're either holding down every down roles despite sort of facing competition at the position on their sort of respective teams. Or in Dean's case, his role continues to grow as he gets more comfortable in that scheme. So they're three guys I like as well. So that's the guys we like at linebacker. Let's talk about the ones that we don't. Who's the first player you want to talk about at linebacker who you don't like for week 8?
Yeah, so I think it's a kind of I guess it's a combo of players, right? So it's for me, it's the Buffalo Bills linebackers, Tyrel Dodson and Dorian Williams. We all kind of saw the debacle that was last week where Dorian Williams, who had basically, we thought, locked down the starting role next to Matt Milano, or next to Terrell Bernard after Matt Milano got injured. He was in that role in week 6, but then he was benched in week 7 due to poor play, right? So Tyrel Dodson came into the game. He basically played an every down role for the rest of the way. So I guess I'm just more tentative about what to do with these guys for this week to kind of see if they're going to go back to Williams or if now it's Dodson's job. The coaching staff seems to have, expressed confidence in Dorian Williams still. But again, how much do you trust coach speak? I don't know, especially after they just benched him. So I'd rather see what they do with these guys on the field this week, as opposed to trusting them in their lineups. And it's not a particularly amazing matchup either, where you have to get one of these guys out there. I think Tampa Bay ranks 20th in tackles to the linebacker position. There's also already another full-time linebacker out there in Terrell Bernard who should eat into those opportunities. Bills are an average team in zone defense rate as well. They run a fair bit of man. I especially in a week where there's so many options available to us because there's no bye weeks, I think we should be looking elsewhere for a potential starter over plugging in Dorian Williams or Tyrel Dodson, especially on Thursday Night Football, kind of avoiding the sting of a potential dud on Thursday. That always makes it more painful for me.
It sure does. I mean, is there a more frustrating linebacker situation in the NFL right now than what's been going on in Buffalo? Maybe Miami. I can't think of any other. Just keeping us on our toes every week. I'm as guilty as anybody else for getting excited about Williams when we saw him surge. It was like a full on surge ahead of Tyrel Dodson into that LB2 role in week 6 against the Giants, I believe. So. Yeah, but like you said, just as I was sort of self congratulating myself on beating everybody else to the waiver wire to pick him up,
right?
Yeah, Tyrel Dodson comes out of nowhere to spoil the party. So, yeah, I'm with you. Neither player is in my top 50 this week until we get some kind of clarity on just what the hell's going on with that linebacker situation in Buffalo.
Yeah, for sure. I they're both outside my top 50 as well.
So my first linebacker that I don't like, I've gone with Demario Davis, and he's outside my top 50 for the first time this year. I mean, look, we've kind of been waiting for him to drop off for years. It feels like it's been several years. And to his credit, he's kind of stuck around and remained productive. Like a lot of these guys that spend so much of their time blitzing, his tackle efficiency has been pretty poor, really poor, in fact. And that's been okay. What he's been getting 4, 5, or like last year 9 sacks. But this season he's only got 2 sacks so far, and that's worrying as his tackle efficiency and production in that sense remains really low and really quite poor. So that kind of that concerns me. To add to that, his snap production. I didn't see any sign of an injury. If there was one, I missed it. But you have to go back to week 1 of 2021 to find a game where he didn't play every down. But he's not played every down in 2 of the last 3 weeks. It's happened twice in the last 3 weeks. So Werner, for me, looks like the full-time guy there now. And even Zach Bourne, his role has grown a little bit in the last few weeks. So yeah, even though the Saints have got or the linebackers at least have got a favorable matchup against the Colts this week, I'm not keen on starting Davis over other guys who are either playing full-time or playing a similar snap share to Davis, but are trending in the opposite direction. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, Demario Davis, for me, like I have him as LB 40 this week, so I'm down on him as well. And he's always kind of been this really inefficient tackler. Like I do the tackles over expected charts for the past couple years, and I believe he's been dead last in each of the past 2 seasons. And that takes into account time spent on the edge and what tackle efficiency looks like when you're blitzing and everything like that as well. And he still remains like super inefficient. So he's been a kind of a concern in that regard for a while now. And yeah, last week didn't play a full-time role. He was a game time decision going into that game on Thursday night. He had, I think it was a hamstring injury or something like that. So it's possible that he could have been limited in that game because of the injury. So it was a short week as well, right? So I don't know if that plays into it, and maybe he does go back to a full-time role now that they've had this kind of mini bye week. But I'm with you. He just hasn't been effective enough to really be like a must-start player for even if he is playing every down, right? So that's a big part of it as well. And the Saints being one of the most man-heavy defenses in the NFL as well, which definitely hurts tackle efficiency for the linebacker position. So I'm with you. I'm lower on Demario Davis this week as well.
I mean, I say stuff like this every week, but yeah, watch him blow up and get 3 sacks in the next game, and record a career high like 20 tackles. It's bound to happen. The quick hitters, linebackers that we don't like for week 8. What have you got?
Yeah, so speaking of guys that have been kind of inefficient, Devin White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going against the Buffalo Bills on Thursday night. So there's another Thursday night player here. 9.3 tackle efficiency on the year. So that is 53rd in among linebackers. The average is 13.2%, so nearly 3 points lower than just the average. And he looks pretty bad out there. He has a 47.4 defensive grade, 43.5 run defensive grade. Interestingly enough, he has a career best missed tackle rate at 5.3%, but it's because he's not even in position to make tackles. He's getting blocked out or ending up in the wrong spot that he's not even a factor in the game. So Devin White comes in as LB 29 for me. And the last one is Kaden Ellis. So I know you like Nate Landman. I dislike Kaden Ellis, so I think I'm with you on that one. I have Kaden Ellis as LB 30, 9.9% tackle efficiency on the year. That is 49th in the league, and it is tied with Alex Anzalone, the previously mentioned Prince of Asgard. He's playing every snap as well, Kaden Ellis, but Nate Landman's outproducing him. Nate Landman's been super efficient, and Tennessee, they're going against them. They are 23rd in tackles per game to the linebacker position. So I think we could maybe see even more Landman this week. He hasn't been a full-time player, but Tennessee, that matchup could mean more linebackers on the field. They don't play a lot of 11 personnel, basically.
I like it. I dislike Ellis even more. I've got him way down at 44 this week, which is a pretty huge drop considering where he was to start the year. I really liked him coming into the year, teaming up with his old DC again, who we know can use him. Just not really sold on what I've seen so far.
think I
These
got to move
guys,
him down a bit, but
yeah,
I'm thinking move Landman. I'm gonna probably move Landman ahead of him because I think I have Landman just behind. But I've kind of you've talked me into it. I've kind of talked myself into it as well. I'm probably gonna move Landman ahead of Ellis at this point.
yeah. And what I like about Landman, you mentioned it there with Ellis, is they do have a fairly favorable matchup for linebackers this week against the Titans. So hopefully the stars align and things work out. So I've got to be careful with my list of linebackers that I don't like, because these are really productive players this year. So Tremaine, Edmunds, TJ Edwards, Dre Greenlaw. It's not that I don't like them, that I'm just fading them more than I would any other week because of their matchup, basically. And then a couple of guys whose roles are not what I hoped they would be at this point in the year. So Ernest Jones, Eric Kendricks, and Josie Jewell. We know in Jones' case, it's probably health that's been holding him back from playing more snaps in recent weeks. But Kendricks and Jewell just simply have guys playing ahead of them right now. I expected Kendricks to come back and overtake Kenneth Murray pretty quickly. I'm one of Murray's biggest haters, I think, out there as a Chargers fan as well. So, but yeah, he's kind of been getting it done in weird ways, coming up with a big play here and there, and seemingly keeping Kendricks off the field. So that's been a concern for me. And Jewell just seems to have fallen behind Singleton. Still playing a healthy amount of snaps, but just not what I hoped it would be.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, right? Both of those guys, they were the full-time players there. Then they got hurt, and then when they came back, they had basically lost those full-time roles, even though they're seemingly healthy, right? So same
Yep.
kind of situations there. And yeah, you got to just kind of go where the snaps are. And then Kenneth Murray and Alex Singleton are where the snaps are. And I do like the matchup a little bit more for the Denver linebackers this week, but it doesn't help to not be playing a full-time role like Josie Jewell is at around 80 or so percent. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, linebackers done. Let's move. Let's focus on the defensive line. So DT or edge. Who do you like? Who's your champion on the defensive line for this week?
Yeah, so this is a guy that I keep talking about him because I was high on him coming into the season. I know you like him as well. Josh Allen of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He has been great this season, and I don't think people are giving him the credit that he deserves. Even still, when he already has 6.5 sacks on the season, he's in the midst of a career year, really, in terms of his pass rush metrics. He's earning an 85.0 pass rush grade through 7 weeks, which ranks 11th among edge defenders. He's got an 18.2% pass rush win rate, which is by far the best of his career as well. So I have him as edge 7 this week. He draws a favorable matchup against the Steelers pass blocking unit, which ranks 31st in the league in pass blocking grade. Alan Mosley lines up on the right side of the defensive line, so against the left tackle. Pittsburgh's left tackle happens to be Dan Moore, who owns a 27.0 pass blocking grade on the year, which ranks 76th among 77 qualifying offensive tackles. Kenny Pickett has kind of been the saving grace for the Steelers team, and that he's actually been okay at avoiding sacks, or at least closer to league average, which is impressive given the O-line that he's playing behind. But he's certainly not Patrick Mahomes in that regard. So he'll end up in the dirt a few times, and I think it's got to be Allen for the Jaguars to get him there.
Yeah, you as you pointed out, I also like Allen. I think we're pretty much in lockstep. I've got him as my edge and DL 8 this week. I kind of felt for his fancy managers last weekend. It's really rare you'll see a player dominate in the way that he did and still not manage to take down the QB, isn't it?
Yeah.
7 pressures, 3 QB hits, and not a lot to show for it, really. But it's worth using this to make an example. We shouldn't need a reminder of why of the importance of pressures, I guess, as an underlying metric when evaluating performance of pass rushers. But if we did need a reminder, then this would be a great example of why. If you just looked at the box score or didn't catch the game, you'd probably come away thinking that he didn't really do very much. And that just couldn't be farther from the truth. So, yeah, as you said, this week, the Steelers, you pointed out he's playing against Dan Moore, who moved to left tackle, I believe, last week for the first time this year after stinking it up at right tackle. I know he played better last week, but we saw him play left tackle all year last year, and the results weren't pretty. So, yeah, it's advantage Allen by a wide margin.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm excited. Hopefully he makes up for that. Yeah. Again, that was another one of those Thursday night stingers that just hurts for up until Sunday.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, good to see. Good to see all the same. So for me, I've gone with, and this one might raise some eyebrows. I've gone with Quinnen Williams. So for me, he's ranked as my DL24 or my DT4, one behind Joey Bosa and one ahead of Jermaine Johnson. Look, I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. It's been a rough year for Williams fantasy managers. People probably invested quite a lot to acquire him in redraft after watching him put up sort of 13 sacks last year. But so far this year, got no sacks in 6 games, no forced fumbles, and only 19 tackles to show for his efforts. But what may be overlooked, I think, is that he is getting close. He's tied for 5th at the position in total pressures, and he's the only guy in that top 5 who hasn't already had his bye week. So what it comes down to, though, really, and the reason I'm talking about him this week is because I don't think there's a better week for Williams to catch fire than this week against the Giants. They've allowed the most sacks in the league with 36. That's not true. The second most sacks in the league with 36, behind the Commanders, of course. And their offensive line is really struggling with injury. Matt Pert, Evan Neal, Andrew Thomas, John Michael Schmitz, and Josh Ezuda, all nursing injuries. We've got to be a lot of humble pie when it comes to nominating a guy that we expect to go off in any given week. It doesn't always work out that way, but in this case, I feel like Williams' matchup is so good that I will take absolutely no responsibility whatsoever if he doesn't deliver. It's entirely on him.
Yeah. This is so funny because I was gonna put Quinnen Williams on my list as well, and I also have him as DT4. And I kind of had a feeling that you would have him on here. We talked about this like last when you were on my podcast doing the preview, how similar like some of our rankings are, and kind of looking at these guys. And I'm with you 100%. If Quinnen can't get a sack this week, then maybe there's some concerns there. But he's still been a decent pass rusher from the interior. I think 75.1 pass rush grade. He's got 25 pressures, 5 QB hits. So he's doing his thing as a pass rusher. He just hasn't got that sack luck yet. So he should get it against the Giants this week. The matchup is too good.
It is. And his win rate as well is also up there. I think it's top 15. So yeah, it's not quite where we want it to be, but I feel like this has got to be the week. This has got to be the week.
Yeah.
Other guys that we like on the defensive line, who are your quick hitters?
Yeah, so I'll go to the DT position as well. I have Jalen Carter of the Philadelphia Eagles, so he's DT6 for me. Really kind of a layup going against Sam Howell. You mentioned it. The Commanders have given up a ton of sacks. It's really Howell that's given up a ton of sacks. He has taken 40 sacks on the year. He's allowed a higher pressure to sack conversion rate than any other quarterback in the league at 33.1%. Jalen Carter has looked amazing as a rookie. 90.0 pass rush grade here in year 1, which ranks 3rd at the position. Also 27 total pressures, which is 4th. He's got 3.5 sacks. I like him to get another sack or 2 in this game for sure.
Yeah. Are you concerned about the snap share? That's the only thing that holds me back with Carter. I'm loving how he's playing. I'm loving how he's playing, even though he's not playing very much. But I've just got a slight concern, can he keep that going when he's playing so few snaps? And we saw that peak when I think it was Fletcher Cox was out, but Cox came back and then Carter dipped below something like 40% last week, which I hate to see. I'd love to see him play more, but that's the only thing that concerns me with him. Everything else is exactly where we want it to be, way beyond where I imagined it would be.
Yeah, for sure. So that was I think the only thing that concerns me about the snaps is that he missed week 6 with the injury and then came back last week and was potentially kind of being eased back in snaps. So that was his lowest snap share of the year. I believe it was close to it. It's definitely the lowest amount of snaps that he played on the year. So I do wonder if that was just kind of them easing him back in, coming back from injury, and then he potentially kind of gets ramped up a little bit more as the weeks go on. So hoping that it doesn't stay around that side, that snap share, but goes up as the weeks go on.
Yeah, I got you. They'd be silly to keep it at that level, I think. Yeah, by far the most effective guy on that interior.
Yeah, he's been amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So my quick hitters on the defensive line, I've gone with Jermaine Johnson for many of the same reasons as I mentioned with Quinnen Williams, really. So playing against a really poor offensive line that is, as I said, just decimated with injury. So I like Johnson's chance of making some noise this weekend. Josh Allen, who you mentioned already, he's on my quick hitter list against that suspect Steelers line. Joey Bosa, healthy again, for now anyway. And ready for a bigger workload against a Bears O-line that just hasn't looked good and might be missing Justin Fields as well. And then finally, George Karlaftis, who has the pleasure of facing Mike McGlinchey, who was allowed the most pressures and is tied for allowing the most sacks of any right tackle in the league. So I do like Karlaftis' matchup there.
Nice. I like it. Yeah. And even nice to have for Kansas City, Charles Omeni, who coming back could potentially be one of their better pass rushers this year. They got Mike Dana. So I like the defensive line for Kansas City this week as well.
Mm-hmm. So guys we don't like, or guys we hate, if we can take it that far. Who's the first guy you want to mention?
Yeah, so I'll go back to Thursday Night Football here because why not? We could see if these takes are going to be right or wrong right away or as soon as possible. And I'm going to go with Gregory Rousseau of the Buffalo Bills. So I have him as edge 26 this week. He's typically kind of been in the edge 2 range for me. Just kind of comes outside of that range. Potentially could be lower as well, but really hasn't been as good as most people I think had hoped for this season. 68.2 pass rush grade, which is 47th among edge defenders. He's only played a 60% snap share. We know the Bills do like to rotate their defensive linemen quite a bit, but 60%, not nearly among the league leaders in that regard. But going against Tampa Bay as well, who are arguably the worst matchup for opposing pass rushers. Tampa Bay owns the best team pass blocking grade at 78.6, and Baker Mayfield has been incredible at avoiding sacks. He's second behind only Patrick Mahomes in pressure to sack conversion rate this season. Rousseau, I don't know, to me just hasn't been good enough of a pass rusher this season to feel great about starting him this week. Only one game all year with a pass rush grade above 70, and the snaps aren't amazing by any means, like I said. So he's really more in that edge 3 range for me this week. I'd have a hard time kind of getting him into lineups when I have, potentially 24 options ahead of him.
Yeah, so this is one I don't want to like. I've been a fan of his for years, but I do agree because I've got him down as my DL 40 or edge 31. He's one of those guys who's always performed rather, but never really put up huge numbers because of that, as you say, that deep rotation on that edge at that edge position for the Bills. So it's been a slower start than usual for him this season. Certainly slower than what we saw from him last year when he got off to a cracking start. But and I do think he'll come good at some point this season. But as you said, this week isn't it. Worth's on one side, playing as well as he ever has, phenomenal offensive tackle, and then on the other side you got I think he's a sophomore, Luke Goedeke, I think is how you pronounce it, and he's been a revelation really in his second year. As he allows something like 10 pressures and a single sack, I thought I saw earlier on. So yeah, not a great week for Rousseau. He's also got Von Miller back in the fold now as well. I know Von Miller's role has been quite small so far, but maybe as he gets back to some sort of semblance of health, everybody else's roles start to diminish a bit more. Lots of reasons not to like Rousseau this week. I'm not ready to give up on him as a player long term, and I doubt you are either. But as we said, not the week for him.
Yeah, makes sense.
So my guy is, and people might not like this as well because I know he's got his fans, but Nik Bonitto, and I've got him all the way down as the DL 61 or edge 49. Look, all credit to him for stepping up in his second year and sort of delivering the goods. He's had 5 sacks in 7 games, and I think he was probably one of the reasons why the Broncos deemed Randy Gregory expendable. But I think Bonitto's going to struggle to continue producing in the same way going forward. Baron Browning's back from injury, and I don't think Browning's any kind of world beater. He looked pretty good last week, though, considering it was his first game back from injury. So my first concern with Bonitto is really the playing time. I think it's going to reduce. And we saw signs of that happening last week with Browning back in the fold. But my other, perhaps bigger concern for this week is that he's playing against the Chiefs. And as you mentioned earlier, the Chiefs' offensive tackles might not be particularly good. In fact, they've been really quite poor this year. But Mahomes is a master of evading pressure. He's given up only 7 or been sacked only 7 times this year. So it's not a case of me hating on Bonitto as a player, to be clear. I think, like I say, he's shown some promise. I'm just not too excited about his opportunity ahead, and I don't like his matchup this weekend.
I'm with you 100%. I put the Denver defensive line as my they're in my quick hitter section there. Really, all of them: Jonathan Cooper, Nik Bonitto, Baron Browning, even Zach Allen among the interior there. Like you said, nobody avoids sacks better than Patrick Mahomes this season. The O-line, even though the O-line is just kind of average, Mahomes still 7.2% pressure to sack conversion rate is really impressive. And they don't even give up a lot of tackles to defensive linemen either, right? So it's not a great matchup in any way. And yeah, I wouldn't want to trust any of these guys in my lineups. I don't think any of them are particularly good enough to kind of overcome the matchup this week.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's weird. It's a weird offensive line they have, isn't it? In the sense that those 2 tackles are so poor, but the interior is really quite good. You know, Creed Humphrey and Joe Thuney in the middle are really very good. So maybe I don't know. There's method in their madness, at least.
Yeah.
So the quick hitters, defensive line. Who have you got on your list that you don't like for week 8?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Denver defensive line, but I also have Daron Payne on here of the Washington Commanders. So he's outside of my top 12 defensive tackles for this week. And honestly, it hasn't really been a good season for Daron Payne. I think I talked about this a lot in the offseason and warned about kind of regression from him pretty much all offseason. And I think it's showing so far this year. Just 1 sack on the year, a 56.1 pass rush grade as well, just 13 total pressures, despite playing 84% of the team's defensive snaps all season long. He's going against the Eagles. They're tied for 5th in pass block grade. Jalen Hurts, 16.1% pressure to sack conversion rate, which makes this the 24th worst matchup for defensive linemen trying to sack Jalen Hurts. So don't love any of that. And yeah, I mean, Daron Payne, I think this is somebody that potentially fantasy managers had high expectations for after last year and his big, sack performance and getting paid in the offseason as well, but has really regressed. It probably even more so than even I expected this season.
What was the interested to hear? What was the reason you thought he was going to regress? Was it his unsustainably high sack to pressure ratio, or was it you thought he was a volume player, perhaps, because he did have a lot of snaps at the position compared to other guys, and obviously with that sometimes comes production that isn't always earned in the same way?
Yeah, it was a combination of both things, really. And because I talked about doing the tackles over expected metrics this offseason, I also do the same thing for sacks for defensive linemen, and that kind of takes into account their average pass rush metrics and what those numbers typically create as far as sacks go, plus playing time and all of that kind of stuff. And he was, I think, number 1 as far as performing over expected. And when we see over expected when it comes to sacks, we know that those numbers typically kind of regress over year, right? So that was one of the big things for me for Daron Payne, was just the pass rush metrics not quite living up to the sack total that he delivered. Even though he played well last year, it wasn't quite as well as the sack numbers would say they were.
Got you. I wonder if not disagreeing with your take on that, but I just wonder whether the quarterback situation for are they playing the Bears this weekend? Did you say? I can't remember off the top of my head.
The Eagles.
The Eagles. Sorry. I wonder because Hurts isn't fully healthy, is he? I wonder if he might be more static and more prone to taking sacks. But as I say that, I'm thinking again about the Eagles' offensive line, and it's pretty damn good. So maybe not. I've talked myself out of the point I was trying to make.
No worries. Yeah, Eagles O-line has been decent this year, at least as pass blockers. So
yeah. So the guys I've got on my quick hitter list at the defensive line position. So I've gone with Aaron Donald. I still have him as my DT2 on the week. He's because he's just so otherworldly talented. I just don't like his matchup against the Cowboys offensive line. That interior, pretty decent. Dennis Gardeck, super productive to start the year, but he's only had 1 sack and 9 pressures in his last 5 games, and had his smallest snap share of the season at 30% last weekend. And he faces a pretty decent Ravens offensive line this weekend. And then lastly, for completely different reasons, Andrew Van Ginkel. Big fan of how he's played to start the season, through those first 5 games especially, filling in for Jalen Phillips. But since Phillips returned 2 weeks ago, Van Ginkel's been used sparingly as a pass rusher, at least compared to where he was in those first sort of 5 games. 10 pass rush opportunities in the last game against Philly. That's just not going to get it done. So yeah, they're my 3 that I'm not too keen on this week.
I like it. Yeah. And Van Ginkel too, like a really interesting player, the way they use him. They kind of use him as this hybrid edge, off ball linebacker, right? Jalen Phillips being back definitely takes away a lot of those edge opportunities for Andrew Van Ginkel, so he could put up those big plays. And I do think Fangio's been using him more as an off ball linebacker when Jalen Phillips is playing on the edge. So yeah, you're right. I think I think I agree with all of that.
Good stuff. So on to defensive backs. Who do you like for week 8? Who's your favorite? Not necessarily a favorite, but who are you keen on?
Well, one of my favorites for sure, and that's Kam Curl of the Washington Commanders. So I always like these guys that had like down weeks, but you kind of know that they're going to have better weeks ahead. So it's kind of like easy pickings for me to kind of say that they're going to be better this week. But he did have an unusually quiet week in week 7, just 3 total tackles on the day. But he played 100% of defensive snaps, which is the main thing that we're looking for. But even better than that, he's played 43% of defensive snaps in the box this season, which is about as ideal of deployment as we can ask for from an IDP perspective. He also draws a matchup against the Eagles this week, who are averaging the most tackles to the safety position on the year at 18.1. So just really like this as a kind of a great bounce back spot for Kam Curl this week.
Yeah, good shout. I'm a Curl fan, not as much as Jake. I think it's Jake Colhagen is the biggest Curl fan I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, look, Curl's not a flashy guy. He's not a threat to record many interceptions, if any. I think he's got any in the last 2-3 years actually. Sacks, forced fumbles, not really his thing either. So if you're in a league that rewards big plays highly, then I can understand fading him a little bit there. But what he will do is to put up, great tackle volume. And he currently ranks 3rd amongst all safeties with 53. So, yeah, like you said, that Eagles matchup, ideal for a player like him. He can really rat the tackles up, I think, and really remind us why we rank him so highly as we do. As I say, he's my DB6. So clearly I'm in line with you in that way of thinking. So my guy is... and I said I'd give sort of cornerbacks a little bit more love this week. So I'm going to start with Darious Williams, cornerback for the Jaguars or Jaguars, depending on what country you're in. So I've got him ranked as my DB21 or my CB2 for week 8, one behind Jordan Fuller and one ahead of Rayshawn Jenkins. He's not up there with the best of the cornerbacks in terms of tackle volumes, trails the likes of, the Kenny Moores and the Diomedor Lenoirs of the world in that sense. But he leads the league with 8 pass breakups. He's tied for the league lead with 3 interceptions, and he's even forced a fumble. But also, I love his matchup against the Steelers this weekend. They allow the 3rd highest tackle efficiency to opposition cornerbacks, thanks to your chart, John. Thanks for that. And while Pickett has been pretty safe with the football this year, I think his offensive line has been pretty damn rubbish. So I can see a scenario where Pickett isn't given that much time to throw the ball, thanks to the likes of Josh Allen and co. And maybe Williams can get his hands on the ball on some of those errant throws.
I like it. Yeah, he's been awesome this year. I was just gonna pull up my updated chart here because I did update it last night. I haven't put it out there yet. So the Steelers, see if they're still first, and they're pretty close as far as efficiency goes. So 23%. So yeah, they're right there. They're sixth in the league now. So they did drop a fair bit after last week, but they're right up there. Still a positive matchup for him, above average at the very least. So I like Darious Williams. I can't remember where I have him ranked. I put him fairly high as well. So I'm with you on Darious Williams.
Yeah. One thing that surprised me when I looked up Williams, I don't remember him putting up 96 tackles 2 years ago. Where was I? Did I have my head in the sand? Was this common knowledge, John?
I'm trying to remember as well. 2 years ago gets that there's way too much data in between then and now for me to kind of try to remember them, especially for cornerbacks. So I don't remember that either. But yeah, if you say it happened, I'm sure it did.
Maybe it's a misprint. Maybe it's a misprint. I don't remember it happening, but yeah. I'm, as I say, not liking him because of the tackle volume, but he's been a big play machine, and I'm here for all of that. So, so who don't you like on the or at the defensive back position?
So I don't like. I don't like Jessie Bates. So Jessie Bates comes in. Yeah, he's been awesome this year, right? He's been so good for the Falcons, but and you know what, he's been a decent tackler too, but he's really moved up kind of the scoring leaderboards off a bunch of kind of unstable big plays, 3 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles as well. But he's also going against the Titans, who are 31st in tackles allowed to the safety position per game this year. You got Richie Grant there as well, who's also typically playing closer to the line of scrimmage. He's been a fine tackler in his own right. So Jessie Bates kind of stands out to me as somebody that could be, the odd man out as far as tackling goes in this game for the Falcons. He plays 76% of his snaps deep this season. So this is not a Titans offense that's necessarily getting the ball too deep downfield, especially with Derrick Henry in the lineup and not Ryan Tannehill. It's a combination potentially of Malik Willis and what's his face? The banana eater guy. Will Levis.
Well,
Will Levis. Yeah, the banana peel. That's what I think of immediately. It's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. So I just don't have faith in that Tennessee offense being able to sustain drives and create enough opportunities for this to be a big game for Jessie Bates. Yeah.
I hear you. Where do you have him ranked this week?
So I have him as safety 18. He's always been kind of higher than that for me, but I'm starting to kind of push him a little bit lower too, as I kind of talk myself into it. I might push him lower, closer to the 20 to 24 range, I think.
Okay. I'm a little higher than you on Bates. Maybe I'm biased because I play in some big play leagues, and in those leagues he is just undroppable. Given how he's played so far, I understand your point about whether or not, or questioning about whether or not some of those big plays are sustainable. But he's kind of been that guy for most of his career. So I'm kind of believing what I'm seeing, I guess. But you're obviously right to mention the tough matchup in terms of oppositions that don't allow a lot of tackles to the safety position. So no argument there. My man, but he is still my DB8 for the week. I have moved him down from the DB3 spot based on the matchup more than anything else. But what gives me pause for thought in dropping him any further is the same point you mentioned. So him not having a good matchup, how much of that is down to Tannehill, and what would the Titans' game plan be without Tannehill, and is there a way in which that could play into Bates' favor? Probably not, I think, given that he does play so deep. Just thinking this through as I talk about it here. But it gives me enough pause for thought. If everything was as it ordinarily is with the Titans, then I'd be much more confident in ranking Bates a little lower. But just that uncertainty about how they would approach the game makes me want to play this sort of a bit more cautiously.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's definitely a fair way of looking at it, especially because he's, like you said, he's been so good this year, and I love him as a player. But he's always kind of been more like of a matchup dependent type option for me, because he has these up and down games all the time, these big swings in production. So this feels like one of those ones where it could be lower, but you're right, it could absolutely still pop off if he gets some interception opportunities again as well, right?
Yeah. I was gonna mention the interceptions, but as you know, predicting interceptions
Yeah.
is a fool's game. But this is Bates, so you never know.
Yeah.
We're on to who the guys I don't like. So I said I'd focus on some cornerbacks, as I said earlier on. So this week I'm going to stick with that and double up and go with Tre Brown as the guy that I'm out on this week. He's actually completely unranked. So the reason I mention him is the CB16 in Big 3 IDP scoring and ranks 6th amongst all corners in average points per game. He's had a sack, he's had 2 forced fumbles, 2 interceptions, 3 pass breakups. That's great, but he's not going to sustain that sort of production when he's playing as few snaps as he is. He's had between 72 and 83% in 3 of the 5 games in which he's played. But last week, his role just disappeared. He played like 30% of the snaps, and the Seahawks went to sort of a 3 safety look involving Quandre Diggs, Jamal Adams, and Julian Love. So, yeah, I'm not ruling out the possibility that was a sort of a game script thing or maybe a specific game plan for Arizona, because Clint Hurt didn't really use a lot of 3 safety looks last year. But until we see Brown command a larger role, I just don't think he can be trusted. Certainly not at a position where we've got so many other options as well.
Yeah, I'm with you. As soon as you see those snaps drop, you basically abandon ship, right? At least for the week until we see them come back up, because there's just too many options there, especially at the cornerback position. So I am definitely fine kind of fading Tre Brown this week.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So have you got any quick hitters at the defensive back position who you are not keen on?
Not keen on. So I will go with Harrison Smith. So Harrison Smith of the Minnesota Vikings. I have him as safety 25 this week. Again, another matchup dependent thing. Green Bay is actually dead last in tackles allowed to the safety position this year, only giving up 8.7 per game. And Minnesota specifically has like 3 full-time linebacker or safety options, that they're mixing in there. So that really kind of thins out the pie for these guys. Cameron Bynum and Josh Metellus, those are the guys that are getting in the mix. And Bynum has been kind of unreal as a tackler, 14% tackle efficiencies. He added 2 interceptions last week as well, which he's done by playing just under 50% of his snaps from a deep role. So he's not like a true deep safety. He moves around quite a bit, and that's what's helped him kind of maintain that tackle rate pretty decently. So I think Smith could potentially be the odd man out here. He's the least efficient tackler of the 3. And he's also kind of moving around a fair bit, while Metellus has the better deployment of the 3 as well. So Smith against Green Bay, the matchup isn't great, so I would be avoiding Harrison Smith this week.
I like it. So my guys, I'm not keen on. I was going to mention Kavon Wallace. He was already low hanging fruit because he didn't play any defensive snaps after Buda Baker came back, but then he was released, so he's kind of like rotten fruit stomped into the ground right now. So yeah, he's an easy one. Donovan Wilson of the Cowboys is a bit of a concern for me. He hasn't played more than 77% of the snaps since he came back 4 weeks ago now. So you'd have to think that that's kind of like their long-term plan for the season for him, rather than them just easing him back in again. Maybe we talked about him on your pod going back 2-3 weeks ago as someone who we expected to, step into that larger role in a slightly progressive fashion, but it just hasn't happened. And then I currently have Reed Blankenship unranked after he missed last week with an injury. But even if he gets healthy in time for the weekend, the arrival of sort of Kevin Byard is concerning. Yeah. And I liked seeing Sidney Brown get some playing time last weekend. But while there's any uncertainty about who partners Byard at the back end, it's just a situation I'll look to avoid. Again, there's loads of other options at DB. So I'm happy to play the waiting game and, go for the guy who steps into that role next to Byard. Have you got any insight on who you think that's going to be?
Yeah, I think like if Byard is, or if Reed Blankenship's healthy, it's going to be him. So if Blankenship's not healthy, then it's Sidney Brown, fellow Canadian Sidney Brown as well. So.
Yeah. Bit of bias there, John, but we'll allow it. We'll allow it. Okay, so that with that comes to the end of the show, John. As I said off air earlier on, I know you've got a crazy schedule, so I appreciate you taking the time to drop some knowledge bombs on the show tonight. But before we wrap up, Can you take a moment to tell the audience where to find you and your work, please?
Yeah, so all of my work can be found on pff.com. We do the IDP fantasy report over there where you can find all the snap shares and utilization and waiver wire targets for all IDPs. That comes out every week. It's free on pff.com. I have my IDP rankings over there as well. And we do the IDP preview episode on the PFF Fantasy Podcast. You could find it on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube as well. And at PFF_Macri on Twitter as well. But always happy to answer IDP questions and talk IDP. So I appreciate you having me on, Jase, one of my favorite people to talk IDP with. So thank you very much.
Oh, stop it. But yeah, look, thanks, Jon. And to the audience, thanks for tuning in. You guys and your feedback has been incredible all year. I'll be back at the same time next week with the wonderful Dynasty Trip, the Football Guys fame. In the meantime, good luck with your Week 8 matchups. Please check back on the rankings on the idpshow.com site before games begin to catch up on any injury updates. And see you soon.
This was the IDP After Show.